Hello class, I'm Dr. Edwin Quinn Jr. Welcome back. With this particular lecture, we will discuss the leading portion of the functions of management. So for this particular lecture, we'll discuss Chapter 13, Chapter 14, and Chapter 15. Also in this lecture, we're going to discuss controlling function of management too as well. So let's jump directly into Chapter 13 when we discuss the important function of motivating our particular team. Okay? So we see here that motivation is a set of forces that initiate, directs, and makes people persist in their efforts to accomplish their overall goal. Okay? So the basics of motivation include these three following concepts: effort and performance, need and satisfaction, extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail to kind of figure out exactly how do we move forward and motivate our team members in our organization utilizing these three particular concepts. So let's look at effort and performance. Okay. So we see here, according to our textbook, the basic model of effort and performance. We see effort is based upon initiation, direction, and persistence, where individuals kind of use this overall process to create the performance outcomes that we set and establish within our particular organization. So let's look at this particular equation here. We can measure performance by the motivation, the ability, situation, constraints. So let's look at job performance. Job performance is how well someone performs the requirements of that particular job, while motivation is the effort or the degree to which someone works hard to do the job well. So they have to have a clear motivation of why they want to be successful in completing that particular task that we have designated for them in that organization. Let's look at ability. Ability is the degree to which workers possess the knowledge, skill, and talent needed to do a well job. In some cases, our team members may not necessarily have the skills or the talent to do certain type of jobs, certain type of tasks that we are actually requesting for those individuals. What about situational constraints? These are factors that are beyond the individual control, such as tools, such as policies, such as resources that have an effect on the ability of the individual to actually complete the overall job performance. In certain cases, situational constraints can really affect the ability of job performance because those things are completely out of the realm of control of the individual working on that particular task. Let's go to our next slide here. We see also, we're reflecting back to one of the basic motivations that we can look here at need satisfaction. Need satisfaction is basically how does the individual identify the particular needs in order to be successful as far as they perceive themselves in a particular environment. So we see needs are the physical or psychological requirements that must be met to ensure survival and well-being. So a person's unmet needs creates an uncomfortable internal state of tension that must be resolved. So people are motivated mostly by unmet needs. Managers must learn what those unmet needs are and address them. Once they is met, it is no longer a motivation. Here's a great example when we think about this particular basic model of work motivation and performance. We see here an individual within an organization may be unsatisfied. We create some type of tension so they can move forth in the marketplace in order to create a new action in order to become a little bit more satisfied. So we see this ability of the effort for initiation, direction, and persistence that affects the overall performance in order to create satisfaction. So needs are these psychological and physical requirements that must be met for sure individual survival or well-being. So a person's unmet needs create this uncomfortable condition, this internal state of tension that must be resolved. According to needs theory, people are motivated by unmet needs. So we see in this continuing cycle of individuals have these unmet needs, tension creates, they're energized to take action, and they use efforts, which is initiation, direction, and persistence to create performance and also satisfaction to fulfill their original tension. Okay? So let's look here at another perspective of needs. We have three different theories that we can use to kind of indicate a little bit more about our perspectives of needs. So we look at Maslow, for example. Maslow's hierarchy of needs are arranged in a hierarchy from lower to higher. People are motivated by their lowest need of unsatisfied needs. Here's a great example when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We see the clear hierarchy that individual has to achieve in order to fulfill their overall need. First one, this philosophical process where individuals need water as well as food. We see the need of physical versus safety and need economic situations in order to be effective. We see the need also continue to evolve to a need of belongingness, friendship, love, and social interaction. Then we see the hierarchy. Once that need is achieved, we see self-esteem, a need for achievement and recognition. And then finally, we get to the final point of the Maslow hierarchy of need of discussing the ability for self-actualization, which is realizing what is your full potential and how can you truly move forward to satisfy those particular needs. Now, Maslow theory basically indicates that each need has to be fulfilled before the next need is able to kind of move forth and that individual focus on that particular need. So safety must come before belongingness, esteem, and self-actualization. All right, so let's look at another theory here that we can talk about for a predictor of need. Now, the Affert's ERG theory basically is kind of similar to Maslow's hierarchy of need, but basically he focused on E for existence, R for relatedness, and G for growth. We see existence is that safety and that philosophical need. We see relatedness is that belongingness, and also growth, esteem, and self-actualization. Unlike Maslow's hierarchy of need, the ERG theory kind of collapses Maslow's hierarchy of need into these three different overall functions. Let's look at another degree here of need that we can kind of satisfy. McClellan learning theory needs suggests that people are motivated by the following, right? The need for affiliation, the need for achievement, and the need for power. His particular theory basically indicates that that's not necessarily a hierarchy of need that exists for individuals, that individuals are all pretty much different and kind of drift in and out of these particular needs depending upon the certain type of situation they're actually involved in. So certain individuals may have a need for affiliation, a need for achievement, and a need for power. So these are three good ways to kind of think about how do we create an understanding of the basics of motivation. Okay? All right, so let's look at some things too that also deal with motivation about what leads to efforts. Higher order needs will not necessarily motivate as long as the lower needs continue to remain unsatisfied. That's an indication of what Maslow's hierarchy of need was basically indicating. So it's kind of difficult to predict which higher order need will motivate employees' behavior. So to a certain standpoint, you really have to cultivate those relationships with individuals, your team members, to truly understand what needs are necessary to motivate those individuals. And it's also important to consider that the relative importance of the various of needs may change over time. So as individuals kind of drift in and out of their personal desire in order to be successful, for example, when we look at the learning need theory suggests here that some individuals may have a need for affiliation a little bit more than they have a need for power. Depending upon the status they are in that particular organization, these needs can change over time as individuals actually progress within their organization or even being able to accomplish certain type of goals and objectives. Now let's look here, also looking at our need theory or what motivates individuals. We can talk about our intrinsic as well as our extrinsic reward systems. Now, when we talk about extrinsic rewards, that's all those primary basic things that organizations provide employees in order to attract them to completing a significant amount of jobs and responsibilities and tasks that are designated within an organization. So these intrinsic rewards are these tangible, visible to others, and are given to employees contingent upon performing specific tasks or behaviors. Those are things that we think about as far as our fringe benefits package, our salaries that we can provide employees, the ability for or reward and recognition. Those are the type of things that are important for individuals when we start thinking about those extrinsic factors. What about those intrinsic factors? Those are the natural rewards associated with performing a task or activity for its own sake. That's kind of like the overall ability of enjoying the nature of your work, enjoying your co-workers that you're actually working in, kind of reflecting about Maslow's hierarchy of need of self-fulfillment and self-achievement that you may have. Those are things that are internal that kind of motivate the individual to achieve an overall goal that exists within the organization. Okay, so let's look at motivating with the basics. Start by asking people, what do they need? You have to have those tangible conversations with team members to kind of truly identify what are those particular things that drive them, what are those things that they're looking for to receive from that particular organization. We must also understand that satisfy lower needs must be done first, and expect people's needs to change within our organization. And as needs change, the lower needs are satisfied and also create opportunities for employees to satisfy the higher order of needs. So let's switch to a little bit more beyond the basics of motivation of individuals to specific theories that we can kind of anchor some of our motivation concepts. Excuse me. Equity theory, it basically indicates that people will be motivated at work when they perceive that they are being treated fairly. In particular, equity theory stresses the importance of perceptions. So we look at this particular theory and understand that each individual has a different perception about how they view the world. They have certain type of predispositions that can change their overall reflection about how they actually interpret information in reality. So their ability to see what is being fairly treated as far as their co-workers, how they're being promoted, how they're being compensated, how they're being rewarded, can affect their overall ability to be motivated within the organization. So that kind of anchors back to equity theory. So let's look here at the different types of components of equity theory. We see inputs, outcomes, and reference. So inputs are those things that employees contribute to the organization. That may be the education, maybe their training, it may be their experiences, it may be additional hours worked within an organization to complete the overall goal. Then we also see the outcome. We see what employees get or receive as exchange for their contributions to the organization. Outcomes include those things like those extrinsic values that we were talking about previously, the fringe benefits, status, job title, and then of course pay to as well. And then looking at this final component here of equity theory, there's reference, right? Those whom people compare themselves to within their organization. If they have been treated fairly, people usually compare themselves as reference who have the same or similar type of job within the same organization, sometimes similar in gender, ethnicity, age, tenure, and characteristics that within their organization. So input, how hard an individual works and within their organization affects their output, what they receive from their organization from all their efforts. And then the equity theory goes into how individuals kind of reference and compare themselves as far as how they're being compensated as well as treated within their organization for all their efforts. So let's look here how we deal with forms of inequity within organizations. So we have under reward and over reward. Under reward occurs when a reference, when output or input ratio is better than yours. Your output to input ratio, in other words, gets fewer outcomes related to your input than your reference compared to yourself that you're actually getting. So your individual that you're actually comparing yourself to is receiving more rewards than you particularly are in that organization. What about over rewards? We see this happen when a individual output input ratio is worse than the output input. So in this case, you're getting more outcomes relative to your inputs than your reference is. In this theory, people perceive they're kind of being kind of overcompensated to a certain standpoint and feel a little bit guilty by receiving over rewards within their organization. Let's look at ways how individuals can kind of change their overall motivation based upon the concept of equity theory. So they can begin to decrease or withhold their inputs, not working as tangible as necessary, not putting forth the long hours as necessary in order to be successful. They can also increase certain type of outcomes, trying to make sure the organization can provide a little bit more compensation if it's over rewarded to a certain standpoint. We see this rationalization or distortive inputs to outputs when individuals are changing the type of efforts they're putting in. You're also seeing changing in their reference with how individuals are thinking about who they compare themselves to in the organization. And to a certain standpoint, when this equity theory gets so greater where individuals begin to see it's more fair for them to leave the organization than to kind of remain from how they're being treated and compensated. So we can see this overall equity theory in this overall concept here. We see the difference that happens when individuals are taking force, they're dealing with this tension, taking action, and then we see this equity theory kind of kicking in where individuals are starting to change their efforts because how they compare themselves and they see inequalities compared by the individuals who they actually are comparing themselves to. Okay? So let's look at some ways to kind of motivate with equity theory. We can start looking for the correcting and major inequities that exist within our organization. We can kind of reduce employees' input to a certain standpoint and make sure decision-making process is fair. We can use the distributive or procedure justice. Distributive justice is the degree in which rewards are fairly distributed within our organization. Especially is important when we start thinking about how individuals kind of compare themselves to their co-workers and colleagues within the organization. We have to make sure we have a fair procedural justice too as well, that the procedures used to make rewards, make promotions, to make individuals who are serving on certain type of special projects, we have this good procedure put in place that's fair for all our individuals in our organization. All right, so let's switch to another theory here. We have this expectancy theory, which means that people are motivated to the extent to which they believe that their efforts will lead to good performance, that the performance will be rewarded and that they will be offered attractive rewards. So let's look at this a little bit more in detail here where we can kind of see expectancy theory is a systematic gathering information to find out what is it exactly that motivates individuals in their organization to achieve the outcomes you have designated. Then we take specific steps to link rewards to individual performance in a clear and understandable way. And then we can use expectancy theory to kind of empower employees to make decisions, and management really wants them to believe that their hard working efforts will lead to the good performance that they actually expect from their organization. Let's look at another theory here. Reinforcement theory, right? So this particular concept really gives us the opportunity to kind of think about in our organization what type of behavior, what type of skill, what type of processes that we really want our individuals in our organizations to exhibit. So with reinforcement theory, we think about behavior as a function of its consequences. Behavior follows by positive consequences will occur more frequently, and behaviors followed by negative consequences or not followed by positive consequences will occur less frequent. So we see the ability of organizations have a chance to kind of reward positive behaviors and also provide consequences for negative type of behaviors. So these reinforcement contingencies here are these causes and effects relationship between performance of specific behaviors and specific consequences. For example, a docking employee who's actually being late for work. Think about from a certain standpoint, when you have a reinforcement process, is it a schedule of reinforcements? What's the frequency that you're actually providing for your method of reinforcement, making sure that it's fair among your individuals that exist within your organization. So you have to have these clear schedule or set of rules regarding reinforcement contingency that specify what behaviors will be reinforced, and what consequences will result for those particular behaviors. Okay? So let's look at some components of reinforcement theory here. We got positive reinforcement, we have negative reinforcement, you have punishment, and then you also have extension. So let's look at positive reinforcement. Those are those behaviors that we want to keep within our organization. We really want to exhibit and see repeated over and over again by employees. And you use this process of positive reinforcement by following behavior with a desirable consequence, most importantly, some type of positive reward. Negative reinforcement is basically identifying those certain type of consequences that are basically unpleasant for employees when they exhibit a certain type of behavior. Punishment weakens behavior by making sure that we have a clear, concise method to kind of deliver the overall punishment or a negative reaction or consequence as a result of an employee exhibiting some type of behavior. And then we also see extension, was basically a reinforcement strategy that is no longer allows for employees for a previous reinforcement behavior. So you pretty much have identified what type of behavior you want in your organization. The extension kind of weakens that behavior and makes it less likely to occur. All right, so let's look at motivating with reinforcement theory. Key ways to kind of think about what type of ways of how we can utilize that positive, negative reinforcement, the frequency of those type of behaviors, or the type of consequences necessary for reinforcement. We can identify, measure, and analyze, intervene, certain type of evaluations necessary for us to kind of move forward with a reinforcement necessary. We don't reinforce the wrong behavior. We correctly administer punishment at the appropriate time, making sure that individuals are fresh and aware of the situation that occurred and that they're receiving some type of reinforcement that's appropriate to that particular situation that occurred. And then we're going to choose the simplest and the most effective schedule for the reinforcement process. All right, so let's switch theories now to another type of motivational theory that we can use in our organization called goal setting theory. Goal setting theory basically that people will be motivated by the extent that they accept specific and challenging goals and receive feedback that indicates their progress towards their goals. So this kind of echoes the importance that we really see individuals are truly motivated by having clear, specified goals that we can designate in our organization to encourage individuals to move towards. So let's look at here how we can think about goal setting theory and some of its overall components. We see the importance of having goals specified within our organization to an extent to which they are detailed, they are exact, and they are ambiguous. We want to make sure, kind of similar we talked about in our previous lecture about the importance of having SMART goals, that they are clearly specific, designed, quantitative, and also measurable. You want to make sure goals have some range of difficulty for those individuals, have some range of challenges for those individuals to kind of push them a little bit more to kind of move forward. Kind of think about what's that moonshot approach that we really want in our organization. And then we see the importance that we have goal acceptance, which is how individuals in the organization or that particular team kind of agree about their overall goal that they're moving forward. And then finally, we see the importance of having performance feedback. That is about the quality or the quantity of the past performance and indicate whether the progress is being made to accomplish the overall goal we have set forth. All right, so finally, think about ways that we can use motivation with goal setting theories. So we can assign employees specific, challenging goals. We can make sure workers are truly accepting the goals we have designated in our organization. And then, of course, finally, we can provide frequent feedback that is really specified about how individuals are actually performing in the organization to achieve the overall goals. So with motivation theory, this particular chapter, we kind of highlighted some good ways to kind of think about the best approaches to kind of motivate individuals within our organization from this particular chapter. Excuse me. So we see the importance of understanding the basic fundamental approaches about what motivates individuals. These efforts and performance, these need satisfaction, these extrinsic as well as intrinsic rewards. We see that efforts and performance is a result of initiation, directing, and persistence that can be changed within an organization depending upon the perception the individual is feeling about whether they have an equity belief about receiving the outcomes necessary for all their inputs within an organization. Also, a good way to kind of think about, reflect, and understand the basics of motivation is this need satisfaction, right? So need satisfaction echoes the importance of us understanding that individuals within their organization will have a variety of different needs. These needs, a good way to kind of predict these needs is looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that individuals must go through this process of hierarchy before they can achieve these different needs in order to be successful. While ERG theory, E for existence, R for relatedness, and G for growth, can collapse these different type of needs of Maslow's but are necessary for them to be successful. And then finally, we see McClelland's learning theory basically pretty much indicates that individuals have these needs as not necessarily based upon hierarchy, but based upon affiliation, achievement, as well as power, and that they can change depending upon what state they are, what disposition they are within the organization. Another key takeaway we can look about is the concept of equity theory that kind of pretty much now hones the importance that people are really assessing in their ability of the organization what each one of their co-workers are actually receiving from their efforts and inputs that they put forth within the organization. We can also see here the importance of expectancy theory, which people are expecting some type of good reward, good performance as a result of all their efforts they put forth within the organization. So we have to make sure we have a clear way we can identify what our employees are expecting from their efforts within our organization. And then finally, we need to think about the importance of having good concrete ways to reinforce positive behavior as well as identify consequences to kind of deal with those negative behaviors too as well. So that's a good way to kind of think about how can we move forward and motivate individuals when we're leading in our organization to be successful. So let's switch gears here to our next chapter, chapter 14, that gets into the conversation that's really pertinent about leading is, of course, leadership. So think about it from this particular perspective, that leadership is that kind of unspoken process that we can kind of see that individuals exhibit time and time again. It's kind of one of those hard things to kind of define, kind of like the wind, we just know it when we actually see it. So let's look here as our textbook kind of describes the difference between leaders versus managers. We see here that leaders are effective of identifying what is the vision, mission, goals, and objectives, versus managers are a little bit more focused upon being productivity as well as efficiency. We see leaders are a lot more focused upon what's that long-term view, while managers are more focused upon what are those short-term view. We see that leaders also expand people's options and choices, while managers kind of focus more about limiting the choices of others. And then finally, we see that leaders are more concerned with the end and what gets done, while manager is a little bit more focused upon the means of how things get done. So let's move on within our lecture and think about what are these primary traits that we see and we kind of expect from leaders. And this kind of echoes the importance of this trait theory of leaders kind of possess these similar type of characteristics that they exhibit. So leaders differ from followers that they have this self-drive that they actually have. They have a desire to lead. They have honesty, integrity. They're a little bit more self-confident. They have this emotional sustainability that they have within them. They have the cognitive ability. And of course, the overall ability of having a clear knowledge and understanding of the business or industry that they're actually operating in. So let's look here at the contingency theory. This is a great concept to kind of think about the overall importance of how leaders respond and act in their overall organization. So we see here the contingency theory here that in order to maximize group work performance, leaders must be matched to the right leadership situation. So we see the importance of understanding because of the dynamics environment within the marketplace, leaders will have to deal with external factors, they have to deal with internal factors, they have to deal with the competency abilities of their subordinates within their organization, and trying to figure out the best way to kind of navigate, which means their leadership style would change or deviate as a result of those type of factors that are taking place. So leaders are effective when their work group leads perform well, when you have great individuals within your organization. Leaders are generally unable to change their leadership style, and they will be more effective when their style is matched to the proper situation. And then the favorableness of situation permits the leaders to influence the behavior of the group members. So let's look at this in a little bit more details about what is a favorable situation for leaders. And we see this as the degree to which a particular situation either permits or denies a leader a chance to influence the behavior of group members. So we see that leader-member relationship, what's the overall ability of the relationship with those members as far as their team, how trustworthy they are, they feel that they can really depend upon this particular leader and respect this particular leader has a significant impact. What about task structure? Are there clearly specified goals? Is there enough tangible information for the group as well as the leader to kind of move forward to be a little bit more successful? Is there clear responsibilities being identified for the leader to kind of communicate to subordinates? And then also the position of power. Does this leader have the ability to kind of either hire, fire, reward, or even punish workers to kind of move forward in the direction that we pretty much identified that we want the organization to move for? So this is a good way to kind of think about those factors that can affect the ability of a leader to make concrete decisions. So according to the contingency theory, it's best to kind of identify and match leaders to the appropriate situation or teach leaders how to change their situation to a little bit more favorable. Basically indicating here, change your leadership style, right? So let's look at path goal theory. Path goal theory, kind of similar to goal theory, is basically leaders can increase subordinate satisfaction and performance by clarifying and clearing the path to goals and by increasing the number of kind of rewards available for goal attainment. So the leader can clearly identify how this group or the subordinates should move forward in order to achieve the overall goal. So path goals give us a clear understanding of these are our different type of leadership styles. We have directing, supporting, participative, and also achievement orientation, while we think about what type of kind of mindset our subordinates are actually dealing with, what type of environment that we're actually dealing with, and then of course focus upon what type of outcome our organization is trying to achieve. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail here. Let's talk about these different type of leadership style. We see here directive leadership style. Basically involve employees knowing precisely what is expected of them, giving them specific guidelines to perform tasks, scheduling work, setting standards of performance, making sure that people follow standards and regulations and policies that we have put in place for them. Let's look at the leadership style for supporting. This pretty much involves individuals having that friendly approach, being approachable, being able to kind of exhibit concern for your teammates, making sure you kind of treat them equally, and then kind of a friendly, almost an informal type atmosphere. Now supportive is also used to a certain standpoint where you have a task for the organization that's a little bit more stressful and challenging for individuals kind of to achieve. What about this participative approach here? Let's see. We see this particular situation where the leader really needs more input from their team in order to kind of identify what's the correct way to kind of move forward for the organization, kind of to achieve the overall goal, and really give those subordinates the opportunity to kind of participate in decision making so they can feel a lot more confident or take a little bit more ownership as far as achieving the overall goal. What about achievement orientation? Of course, with path goal theory, we have to have a clear set goal as far as having a way to kind of challenge those members to kind of move forth with high expectations, displaying confidence, and making sure they have that extraordinary effort in order to move forward. So these are some clear leadership styles that we can kind of think about under the path goal theory. So let's talk about our subordinate contingencies, right? Do our individuals within our organization, do our subordinates have the perceived ability to actually achieve the work that we have designated for those individuals? What about their experience? Do they have the experience? If they have more experience within our organization, we pretty much know that they are more able to kind of get things done. They can take on more responsibility as well as being less managed to when we set goals and priorities for them. What about this locus of control? Now, locus of control pretty much identifies the individuals and their personality of what their actually belief system is, whether if it's internal or external. So internal individuals are believing that, things that just happen to them, either good or bad, is largely a result of their choices and their actions. Those type of individuals have the ability to kind of take on with more experience and kind of move forth on their own direction, pretty much can operate with a lot more autonomy too as well. We see this external, which those individuals that believe that things that happen to them are a little bit beyond their overall control. So they require a lot more direction, a lot more hands-on approach to make sure that they're achieving the overall goal that's set forth. What about the environment contingency? So we see the task structure. The task structure is the degree into which requirements of subordinates have clearly specified goals. When the structure is a little bit low and tasks are unclear, directive leadership style should be used to kind of make sure individuals within your organization are staying focused on tasks. Task structure is high and task structure is clear. However, directive leadership is not needed, but is duplicated what task structure should provide. So when task structures are a little bit more clear, you can have more of a supportive type role for individuals within the organization. What about your primary work group? We see here that this particular concept refers to the amount of work-oriented participation or emotional support is provided by employee immediate for the work group. So if the work group requires a lot more support, we see participative leadership is important for those individuals to kind of identify those complex tasks that we have set forth for this particular group. And then the formal authority system is the ability of that particular leader to have the ability to either hire, fire, promote, or reward individuals within that particular group. Okay, so let's transition to our next slide here. So let's look at path goal theory and kind of do a comparative analysis between when it's necessary appropriately to kind of operate certain type of leadership style. So excuse me. So you see here with directive leadership style, when you have unstructured tasks where goals are not necessarily specified, when workers have an external locus of control where they kind of a little bit more focused that things just kind of naturally happen to them. When you have an unclear authorization as far as being able to kind of hire and fire individuals, maybe your workers don't necessarily have that clear ability as far as experience. And then workers with low perceived ability require this directive leadership style. Versus your structured leadership, where tasks are straightforward, they're simple, almost repetitive in nature, when workers have clear confidence to actually achieve the overall objective, and you have a clear authority to make decisions as far as individuals' positions within an organization. Participative leadership are those where you have complex tasks where you need a little bit more input from your individuals of your team. Those workers have an internal locus of control where they're more confident as far as they can pretty much control their environment by their decisions. And workers are not satisfied with the rewards, so you can bring them in to have a little bit more conversation about what is necessary for them to be more satisfied. Your workers have a lot more experience and they have a higher degree of perceivability too as well. And then achievement-oriented reward, where you pretty much have unchallenging tasks. So we have to make sure we identify these clear tasks for those individuals to kind of move forward. So this is a good way to kind of think about these different leadership styles underneath the goal path theory. Another concept we think about with leadership is also visionary leadership. And that's the ability of an individual to kind of create a positive image that the future that motivates organization members and provides direction for future planning and goal setting or goal attainment. We see visionary leaders pretty much starting to implicate or exemplify the ability of to have this charismatic leadership process. And this is the behavior or tendencies and personal characteristics of a leader that creates exceptionally strong relationships with followers, right? They're able to articulate their clear vision for the future. They can model those values by acting in a way that's consistent with their vision or what they're communicating. They communicate high performance expectations for followers. And then, of course, they display confidence and abilities for an individual to achieve the overall vision. So with this particular situation, when you think about charismatic individuals, their ability to kind of articulate certain type of perspectives, we want to make sure they operate in an ethical format, correct? So we can see here, your exhibit here in your text kind of gives you a great example of think about those ethical characteristics versus those unethical characteristics of being charismatic. Here you can kind of see, let's take a quick look at some of these. What about developing followers? We can see here, let me enhance that a little bit more. There we go. We see here developing followers, that ethical being charismatic, focus on developing people for whom they interact, express confidence in them, and share recognition with others. From a perspective of being unethical, a little bit insensitive, unresponsive to follower needs and aspirations. What about the ability as far as accepting feedback? They're open to feedback, willing to learn from criticism too as well, versus the kind of unethical, kind of have more of an inflated ego or thrive on attention or admiration and kind of avoid candor feedback. So we can see this as a good example to kind of reflect when an individual has charismatic ability, but at the same time are kind of exhibiting those in an unethical manner. Okay, so let's switch to our next slide here. And think about how we look at leadership, where an individual has visionary or that charismatic leadership pretty much operate in this framework that we like to call transformational leadership. These are the individuals that can kind of generate awareness that the current state that exists within the organization, acceptance of the group's purpose and mission to get employees to see beyond their own needs, act more collectively, and think about what is best for the overall group or organization. Being a transformational leader is being able to kind of articulate to the entire organization what is exactly around the corner that we need to focus on and kind of get motivated to actually achieve that overall ability. Okay? Here are some components of transformational leadership. We see again the importance of being charismatic. We see the importance of being able to have inspirational abilities with our team. We see it important to kind of think about and have that knowledge of the overall industry that we're actually in, and think about what those future outcomes are necessary that we need to be motivated towards. And then we also see the point of being transformational, of thinking about our team members and what we need to do to kind of support them and educate them and get them moving towards our goal. Now, so beyond transformational leadership, we can look at transactional leadership, right? So transactional leadership is based on more of the exchange of processes in which followers are rewarded for goods and performance or punishments for their particular performance. So kind of recap, when we think about leading or leadership within our organizations, we have to make sure we have a clear understanding of who should be a leader in our organization, how they're different from managers within our organization. We also have to have a clear understanding of the different traits that we want our leaders to kind of exhibit within our organization, have those clear abilities. And then we also want to think about how contingency theory really indicates how individuals have certain type of leadership being exhibited depending upon the situation or the external environment that the leader has to deal with. And also thinking about path goal theory, it pretty much indicate that leaders will have a different leadership style where directing, supporting, participative, or achievement-oriented depending on the ability of their colleagues, depending on the environment, and depending upon the necessary outcome that we're trying to move forward. And we can also look at here, kind of reflecting on the importance leaders who are being transformational are exhibiting the process of being charismatic and also exhibiting the process of being visionary too as well. So these are some good concepts we kind of echo when we think about the importance of having effective leaders within our organization. So let's switch gears as we talk about leading. Another important concept that we have to consider, of course, being able to effectively communicate our overall goals and objectives within our organization. So think about it from this particular perspective of managing communication is a primary responsibility. How do we deal with the different perceptions, the different predisposed beliefs, the different experiences, different value systems that all our employees have within our organization to get them to see clearly the realities and expectations of our core values, our goals and objectives that we're moving forward within our organization. So perspective is that process by which individuals attend to organize, interpret, and retain information of their environment. So we know individuals tend to have a kind of a selective perspective, which means they tend to focus or notice on information consistent with their own particular values. And then to a certain standpoint have closure, which means they tend to fill the gap where information is missing to assume that what we don't know is consistent with what we already know. So we want to make sure that our individuals are receiving information that is really accurate information that we're communicating. So let's look here too as well when we start discussing the importance of perception of individuals. We see a concept here when we have internal or attribution theory, where individuals, as far as internal, in which behavior is thought to be voluntary or under the control of the individual, whereas external attributions, where individuals are thought to be involuntary and outside the control of their overall individual. To a certain standpoint, we can think about how individuals utilize their perception to make kind of analysis about what's taking place in their environment. They can either have this defense bias that tends to happen where people perceive themselves as personally or situationally similar to someone who they're having difficult or trouble with. And then the fundamental attribution theory kind of give us an understanding that in some cases, people look at the situation or result of the cause of the accident pretty much as a result of that person and not necessarily the result of that situation. So we have to take this into consideration when we think about how individuals develop their overall perception. What about self-perception? It's basically the tendency to kind of overestimate our values by attributing success to ourselves and the failures to others and the environment. We see this self-perception, especially when we start talking about ethical theory, when we start talking about CEOs and board of directors making some type of questionable decisions in the marketplace. Their ability to be successful is a little bit more unrealistic than what they actually can achieve in the organization. Now, when we start talking about communication, we have to think about the communication process. We have a sender, which our textbook gives us a good example here of exhibit, where our sender conveys the message, either encodes the message, transmits the message, and utilize some type of communication channel to send to the receiver. That communication channel can either be email, it can be face-to-face, it can be written, or whatever the designated channel that particular sender has identified. The receiver receives the message, decodes the message, and kind of interprets the overall meaning of the message and should provide some type of feedback to the sender, or the sender should request some type of feedback to make sure that we actually able to convey the proper interpretation of the message that the sender intended to receive. All these other things that we can see here in the background are considered background noise that exhibit for individuals that can kind of distort the overall message that we're receiving or sending. So we see noise as those things that kind of interfere with the transmission of what we're actually trying to send. The sender ensure what the message could convey or communicate. The message is not clear or not necessarily encoded correctly. We see the wrong communication channel may be utilized in certain cases. Email may not be the appropriate way to kind of communicate certain type of messages. We see the message is not received or decoded properly. And then we see the sender doesn't have the experience or the time to kind of truly understand the message, which in certain cases, this is definitely true, especially when we start utilizing technology as a way to kind of communicate certain type of messages. Now let's look at communications within organizations. Think about these formal channels that we develop to kind of communicate with our team members in our organization. So we see here this system of official communication channels, how we organize the information to send to or throughout the entire organization. We see here downward communication is that communication that comes from top managers, those executives that communicate down the organization to managers, to subordinates about what particular goals, what particular objectives, what particular processes or priorities that we're focused upon as an organization. Upward communication is basically the ability of individuals at the lower level to kind of communicate maybe with upper management about feedback about operations, about outcomes they're being able to achieve, maybe about different problems, or about the perception about how the frontline employees actually see what is taking place in the overall organization. Versus horizontal communication, that's that communication that can take place among colleagues about what is taking place, give them opportunity to have collaboration and cooperation about different priorities, and also being able to resolve some type of conflicts that can happen on that particular level without necessarily involving higher members of the organization. So this is a good way to kind of think about what are those formal communication channels. Okay? So let's talk about here our informal communication channels. Where are we? There. So informal communication channels is transmissions of messages from employee to employee, kind of outside that formal process. That's what we tend to call the grapevine that tends to happen within organizations, and that may or may not be accurate information, maybe more gossip about what's taking place in the organization. So the way managers kind of deal with this informal communication process is making sure that they're not withholding information in the organization. They're telling employees exactly what's new and what's happening in the organization, keeping employees informed about changes and strategies that are taking place in the organization, and then also to a certain point, not necessarily overlooking the grapevine, because it can be a source of what's really going on within the organization, especially with different employees and colleagues too as well. So let's look at communication as a method of coaching. Excuse me. So coaching is really an opportunity to kind of give individuals the ability to have some of that one-on-one communication process, to kind of communicate to them how can they effectively improve or enhance their overall job performance. So some mistakes that managers tend to make with coaching is waiting for the problem to occur before coaching, waiting too long to talk to employees after the situation has already happened too as well. So you want to make sure when you're utilizing coaching, you're doing an immediate process and kind of guiding the employee to kind of move forward in the most productive way. Counseling is another good way to kind of think about an effective way of communicating, and that's basically dealing with individuals that may have some issues that are external, beyond the control of the organization. So managers should definitely be effective listening, but not necessarily act as a clinical individual in these type of situation. Ask open-ended questions and making sure that they kind of try to figure out ways to kind of identify the realities of the issue, but not really specifying performance problems in this particular situation. Have the employees share particular issues, and then to certain cases, a lot of employees or employers have different type of employee assistance programs that are available for employees to take advantage of for that additional type of support. So let's look here. When we start talking about the importance of that nonverbal communication, is any communication that doesn't involve words, basically, almost kind of communicate some things a little bit contradicting to what's actually being communicated. So we see the ability of these two things, kinesis and also the paralarynx. We see that kinesis is more about where your body language, your facial expressions, eye contact, folding arms, and a lot of that really goes into play when we start talking about cultural contexts and operating in global environments. Paralarynx, we're talking about the pitch, tone, the volume, the speaking pattern of individuals, their ability to kind of pause and hesitate too as well, are some of the nonverbal communication patterns. We see it's important, especially as managers, when we're definitely utilizing that process of coaching with our team members, that we use that active listening process, assuming have the responsibility for successful communication by actively giving the speaker non-judgment feedback, show that you're actively hearing what they're actually communicating. So good key ways to kind of think about that process of active listening is clarifying the response. You might want to do that by asking some type of questions. You can paraphrase what the speaker has actually communicated, and then also you can summarize some of those key points that the speaker may have been able to articulate. We see here good ways that you can kind of do that. For example, clarify is, maybe I don't understand what you actually mean, giving the speaker the opportunity to communicate a little bit more, or I'm confused, would you run through that again as an opportunity to as well, versus paraphrasing, basically indicating that, I understand you correctly by what you pretty much indicated from that particular standpoint, and then of course summarizing and let me summarize in order to recap. So thus far you discussed these particular points. Okay? So let's continue on. Empathetic listening is also important too as well, being able to kind of understand the speaker's perspective of what they're actually communicating, understand the personal frame of reference and giving feedback that kind of conveys that you truly understand more or less the emotional state that that individual is actually in during that time period, showing your desire to understand, and then to a certain standpoint, reflecting that emotional standpoint that they're actually communicating. Also here you see the importance of being able to kind of give important feedback, destructive feedback and constructive feedback. That destructive feedback is that disapproving without the necessary intention of being harmful to a certain standpoint. In most cases tend to be always kind of a negative or defensive reaction by the participant or the recipient receiving that information. You want to make sure that you're doing that in a non-adjustment process when you're doing destructive feedback. Constructive feedback is kind of a way to kind of be a little bit more helpful with individuals, identifying ways that they can correct certain type of behaviors or performance issues to kind of get them more focused on achieving the overall goals that we have set forth. Okay? And then we can see the importance of dealing with organizational silence, making sure that we don't have a way that we're kind of withholding information or missing information or an opportunity for individuals in our organization to kind of misinterpret what we're actually communicating. So we want to make sure that we have an effective process to communicate what we exactly mean in our organization. So look at some ways we can kind of improve communication. We can have a company hotline too as well to a certain standpoint. Large organization, survey feedback is a good way to kind of reflect how individuals in the organization are really interpret the information that we're communicating. You can use informal meetings as a way to kind of do that. You see that a lot of organizations, what used to be called the water cooler opportunity, where individuals kind of congregate to a certain point. You can see surprise visits. Maybe managers might do this too as well, to kind of go around to different areas of the organization and engage with their particular employees. And then blogs to a certain standpoint is another process that organizations utilize too as well. So when we start discussing the importance, especially with leading, we have to reflect the importance of having strong methods of communication within our organization, reflecting the understanding that individuals in our organization have different perspectives, different values, different ways and dispositions of how they're receiving and interpreting information. We also see the importance of making sure that we deal with this static noise when we're sending information to individuals within our organizations, and that we're also have a good way for our formal methods of communication, that we're effectively communicating downward. Our employees have an opportunity way to communicate upward, and then our employees have a way to communicate among each other too as well. Other ways to kind of think about this process of communication is making sure that you're using coaching within your organization, or maybe counseling with dealing with employees that are having difficult issues too as well. And also thinking about the importance of using active listening within our organization, that you're using clarifying, you're using paraphrasing, you're summarizing response when you're engaging those conversations with employees too as well. And then you're thinking about making we're making sure we're giving feedback that's destructive and also maybe constructive to a certain standpoint. Maybe focus more on constructive feedback, giving the individuals an opportunity to kind of improve in areas that are deficient with their overall behavior too as well. And ways, of course, we can improve within our organization, making sure individuals receiving accurate information. A good way to do that, of course, those informal meetings that can take place throughout the organization. So this particular chapter, we see chapter 15, chapter 14, and chapter 13 communicating the overall abilities of leading within our organization and the importance of those overall processes in order to be effective in leading your team to achieve organizational goals. Now let's switch. We have two other chapters with this lecture we will go over. Mainly importantly, focusing upon how do we create the mechanism of the management function of controlling, which in most cases within organizations, we get into a point where it's more pertinent to control the flow of information, especially in a knowledge creative economy that we currently have right now. So we're seeing controlling is basically establishing these clear standards of performance, comparing performance to those particular standards, especially when you're discussing about the quality or the quantity of product actually being produced. You have corrective actions to repair these performance deficiencies, and then you're kind of using the dynamics of technology to kind of aid you in the overall process. So let's look here. When we start thinking about controlling our organization, we have these clear goals that we can enable achievement, but we're also listening to our customers, identifying how can we best resolve complaints or situations, or even hear suggestions from those. And then, of course, we have a clear way to kind of benchmark with the best ability and outcome of where our organization should be in providing a certain type of service or product within our organization. So let's move here and we'll look at comparing standards. A lot of organizations use a certain type of another organization that's external from their business as a way of benchmarking their overall performance in the marketplace. We see here comparing standards, the quality of comparison depends largely upon the measurement of information systems and a company use of these information systems to basically track overall performance. So throughout your overall organizational process, you want to put in there good ways of planning processes that you can gather this information and analyze this information to kind of identify opportunities for improvement. So we see here, we can identify good ways for corrective actions. We can identify deficiencies. We can analyze the deviations from the qualities that we have in our organizations. And then we can kind of develop and implement these corrective programs to kind of deal with these particular issues. We see some good ways so we can develop control methods within our organization by feedback control, concurrent control, and feed-forward control. Now, feedback control is that mechanism of how we gather information about performance deficiencies after they have already occurred within our organization. Concurrent control is based on addressing problems that are currently taking place within our organization as they occur. Feed forward is that mechanism of gathering information about performance, about future events that may happen within our organizations. So when we think about control, this is a good way to kind of develop clear mechanisms to kind of move forward in our overall organization. So let's look here at our abilities for objective control, right? So objective growth is to use observed measures of employees' behavior or output to assess performance and influence the overall behavior. Now, observed behaviors kind of go more into detail about one of those cognitive or those conceptual frameworks that we can actually see employees actually perform effectively well within our organization. So let's look at the ability to kind of regulate those overall behaviors. A good example of that would be effective customer service. Do we have a mechanism in place to kind of assess that? And then, of course, output controls, making sure that they are reliable, they're fair, they're accurate. Make sure employees and managers must believe that they can produce the overall desired reports or results. And also making sure rewards must be dependent upon achieving established standards that we have set forth within our organization. Let's transition. So, what are some ways that we can think about these normative controls? And this is a good way to kind of think about how an organization kind of builds their overall organizational culture within their business, making sure that individuals understand the overall mission statement, their purpose statement, and their overall ability to kind of reflect their core values to how we act, how we perform, how we serve the customers in the marketplace. So this is a good way where individuals can really tailor an organizational culture to have normative controls to kind of deal with issues that may be happening off the spur of the moment. For example, Zappos is a great example of an organization that has developed great organizational culture to deal with customer service and ensuring that they're giving excellent customer service to service. Conservative control is the belief that are shaped and negotiated by a group of workers. This is a kind of a good way to kind of think about giving your team members an opportunity to kind of think about what are these controls that we can put in place, even though we have significant amount of autonomy, but you're giving that particular group the ability to kind of negotiate control systems to be effective in the organization. This is definitely important when you start having individuals work in group settings. Of course, self-control is something that we want to exhibit. Mainly, this is a great important kind of reflecting back to the chapter of leading, of that transformation process, of being charismatic, making sure you have clear self-control that you can kind of govern your overall behavior. And then a good way that organizations are controlling their overall abilities are they are looking at this balanced scorecard approach, that they're moving beyond the general perspective of financial data and using more of a broad way to kind of look at different perspectives of the organization to kind of interpret what's going on. We look at the customer perspective, we hear internal perspective from our employees, we also look at our innovation and learning perspective, what can we do different, what can we do better, and then we also look at our financial perspective, our different financial ratios about how we're performing in the organization. So this is a good way to kind of get, I guess, a full-sided view, a full spectrum about what's taking place in our organization. Okay, here's a great example of a company that utilized a kind of a balanced scorecard to a certain standpoint. Let's look here, let me enhance this. Okay, so think about it from this perspective. Southwest is a great airline that has done amazing things in that particular industry. The airline industry is one of those that's a little bit challenging to be profitable to a certain standpoint. But you see here how they measure customers as far as having on-time flights and also lower prices. So they measure by having customer ratings and then using the FAA to kind of assess their overall on-time flights. What about innovation and learning too as well? We see their goal is to kind of align the ground crew with the company goals. We see our measure is the percentage of ground crews who have shareholders within the company, and then the percentage of crew who are actually being trained. Another good example, we look at the financial assessment. Of course, to be profitable, of course, to have lower costs and increase revenue, we see an effective measurement is assessing the market value, your seat revenue that you have too as well, and then looking at your lease costs too as well to kind of figure out how you're maintaining your low cost abilities within your organization. So this is a good way how a business can use a balanced scorecard in order to operate in the marketplace. Okay? So let's move on to our next slide here and discuss controlling customer defects, which is a good way to kind of think about whatever product or service that you're providing. You have to identify effective ways to give your customers a way to communicate their overall experience within having service or product within your organizations. So you have to figure out what ways you can give consumers a way to ask, how can you do a better job? Customers who left are more likely than current customers to tell you what you're actually doing wrong. So it's basically more expensive to find a new customer than it is to keep the current customer you actually have. It's also important to kind of think about how can you control the quality. 3 ways. You have your ability to have excellence, your values, and making sure you're conforming to your specifications that you set forth in quantitative ways within your organization. And then finally, we see here the ability to kind of control waste within our organization, being able to kind of recycle certain type of things, making sure that we have a good housekeeping taking place, that our materials and our products are substituted effectively well depending on the different type of products and services we're currently offering. We have a process modification. Recycling, disposal of waste, and treatment of waste is definitely huge in today's environment. And you have to think about this is a huge cost when individuals or corporations begin to utilize this different process, and being able to identify ways to utilize your waste to resell it or minimize your waste to kind of increase your profitability can really enhance the overall organization performance. So you see a lot of the green technology being a result as this type of paying attention of controlling functions take place within an organization. So kind of recap the importance of controlling in organizations and how companies move forth to kind of control things within their organization. Excuse me. So they think about the importance of identifying clear performance standards, kind of figure out a way to kind of compare those standards to internally as well as externally within the organization. We have to kind of figure out a way to kind of repair or those deficiencies that happen within our organizations too as well. We see the importance of having control methods based off those feedback, the concurrent control, and then the feed forward control too as well. When we think about developing an overall control methods in our organization. And then of course, thinking about how can we create an overall organizational culture that has these normative controls that basically can encourage individuals within our organization to kind of do the right thing, mainly because we have a strong organizational culture with clear articulated values. We also see the importance of having a balanced scorecard within the organization, being able to kind of see how do the customers rate our experience, how does our employees rate our experience, how do we initiate learning opportunities or innovation, and then of course, paying attention to our financial health within our organizations. So these are good ways when we think about developing controlling methods as managers within our organization. So let's switch to chapter 17 that talks a little bit more about utilizing information, but at the same time controlling information within our overall organization. So we see the importance because more things are gravitating towards information being knowledge centered. How can we make sure our employees are not leaving our organization, going to another organization, using industry knowledge, and kind of figuring out a way is the best way to protect that. Our textbook talks about the importance of being the first movers within our organization and thinking about creating strategic advantages from information that we produce within our organization. So we see sustainability is also important, and we're using information technology as a good way to kind of do that. So let's think about the characteristics of information. Is it accurate? Is it complete? Is it relevant? Is it timely? And we need this information so we can make sure whenever we move forth in the marketplace and start making decisions, whether to expand or contract our organization, are we having the right information in order to make the clear and the best decision within our organization? So let's look at this. To a certain standpoint, when we're thinking about having information in our organization, if we do not have it, there's a cost to the organization being able to obtain that information. That's what we like to call our acquisition cost. The cost of being able to kind of figure out what your customers think, what your employees actually think. If you can build your overall business system to have that assists you with not having that particular cost. What about process costs? And that's basically turning your raw data into valuable, useful information. You have also a cost for your storage costs, trying to figure out how to archive all this information as far as all the customer experience, all your different employees that come in and out of your organization. You have your retrieval costs for your ability to try to figure out how to obtain those information that's already been stored. And then you also have your communication costs of sending information from one part of the organization to another part of the organization. So let's look here, good ways how businesses are kind of already doing this process of gathering, holding, and accessing information. Barcodes is what we tend to see, especially in the retail industry, that give businesses the opportunity to kind of figure out quick ways to kind of identify patterns and identify knowledge management systems with information. You see also the pen type health scanner is also important. And even to a certain standpoint, a lot of technology has moved more towards using iPads too as well as a good way to kind of capture information and use transaction too as well. So radio frequency identification is a good way how organizations are basically using microchips and antennas to kind of transmit information. And then of course, we're moving more towards scanning data and storing data in their overall process. Okay, so let's look at here how we actually process information. So processing information is basically transforming their raw data into meaningful information that can be applied into overall business systems. Think about from a perspective as if we know the customer experience by having this particular product, which particular product is generating the most success, which particular product is generating the least of success. So we need to use this information in order to make those type of concrete decisions. Good ways to kind of do that is data mining, which is the process of discovering patterns, relationships, and large amount of data. It can be supervised or unsupervised. Supervised data mining is pretty much what we use information technology and software to kind of look for specific patterns within our organization to kind of see what's going on, or we can use to have what if statements to kind of figure out what's going on with our particular corporation. We can also have unsupervised data mining, which is basically giving the software the ability to kind of figure out these different relationships that we have set within our organization. We also see the importance of kind of identifying these different data patterns that result from our data mining. So we can have association, sequence, predictive, and data clustering. Those associations, those two or more things that tend to occur together that creates a kind of affinity to a certain standpoint of a process that we tend to kind of almost predict. We see sequence of two or more data elements coming together for a significant pattern of one element or procedure to another. Predictive is this pattern of identifying elements that are actually different. And then of course data clustering occurs when three or more database elements occur together in a significant type of way of a cluster response. So this is a good way to kind of think about what can happen from our data mining. So also it's important to kind of think about how do we protect our information that we have within our organization. A lot of you guys are kind of familiar with the process of using your authorization process, your password, your username, with your different credentials to kind of log in. You see a lot of organizations using more of a two-factor authorization process where either use your username and you also have to have some type of ID code that's necessary. Biometrics tends to be one thing that organizations are starting moving a little bit closer to, making sure that they're using either fingerprint or even a rectal eye scan to kind of determine if you're the correct individual. Firewalls are a good way to kind of keep other individuals from using company information or accessing unauthorized information. Your VPN, your private network, is a good way for employees to kind of access company information from different locations and being able to communicate that too as well. So these are good ways to kind of think about how do you protect organizational information as you kind of move forward. So think about this perspective too. Another one is the external with executive information system, basically creating an intranet where individuals, especially executive individuals, can have access to corporate information. And then finally, we see here the importance of kind of having this external access and sharing process. A lot of organizations use this electronic data interchange process, web service process that we continue to see a lot more as time continues. And then of course, utilizing the different extranet, which company exchange information or conduct transactions by providing outsiders with direct or web-based authority to kind of use customer information. You see that happens a lot, especially in the retail industry, where companies give suppliers the opportunity to kind of get into the company's information source to kind of figure out what additional supplies they require. So kind of recapping here, the importance of controlling information. And we see here that the growing trend of information management is making sure we can be our first movers, we can sustain competitive advantage, and that we can make sure that we have timely information, accurate information, relevant information, complete information to kind of move forward. We understand that how this information could eventually be a cost of us with acquisition costs, process costs, storage costs, retrieval costs, and communication costs. We also see the importance of using information to kind of capture what is taking place within our organization with customers, suppliers, employees, using data mining as a tool to kind of figure out what are the different data patterns that's taking place within our organizations, what are those things that we can predict within our organizations, what are those things that are creating associations too as well. Excuse me. And finally, we can see the importance of creating clear ways to kind of protect information within our organization, that we're given an opportunity for individuals kind of make sure they have access to company information, but also protecting it from external individuals that may be trying to require information to a certain standpoint. So VPN is definitely a large one, firewalls, and pretty much everyone's used some type of authentication and authorization process in order to access company information. And then finally, some key ways of individuals are really using this web service to kind of continue to allow individuals to have access to information, to be a lot more mobile in their abilities to kind of serve the organization. So we see here two good ways discussed in chapter 16 and chapter 17 about the importance of how organizations can deal with the management function of controlling. So thus far, we have been able to kind of go through the different chapters within the textbook, talk about the importance of management functions, from managing information, from leading organizations, from motivating individuals, and then also from planning a certain standpoint too as well, how business can best identify these management functions to achieve organizational goals. So this concludes our lecture here. I appreciate your time and attention, and I'll see you next round. Have a great day.